Are you the quantum mechanics?
Yes, we are the Quantum Mechanics, the paranormal podcast for the believers, the doubters, and everybody in between.
And we have a new Patreon as well, so we always like to mention them at the top of the show.
It's only polite to say hello, top of the quantum, to you, Dahlia Queen 300.
Thanks, Dahlia Queen 300. We really appreciate you coming to join. Also, we've had a couple of good reviews this week. One from Luke on Spotify and one from Lou on Spotify. So, again, thank you so much, anyone who does a review. Apart from the fact it really does help us, it's really lovely to read as well.
It does. You sent it to me on a text message during the week.
Yeah.
I was having a particularly frustrating moment at work, and that made everything worthwhile.
Put a smile on your face.
It did.
I think we should get straight into the episode because we've got quite a lot to cover today.
Well, you mentioned that there was something, it was from the land of eroticism and love.
Yes,
So
indeed.
I've lit you some candles. I hope you appreciate it.
Yes, and I've given you a glass that's got some drawn-on boobs on as well.
It does, yes. It's quite unlike what I was expecting, but yeah, it's a fine drinking vessel.
Now, who would have thought, having said that little lead-up, the next sentence I would say is, Ben, it's been a while since we've delved into an academic paper.
It has been a little while, yeah. Is that what you're coming from?
Well, yeah, I came across this remarkable and slightly racy paper that details a number of experiments relating to precognition, remote viewing, clairvoyance and ESP, and psychokinesis.
Okay, those are some of my favourite topics.
Yeah. The paper is by Daryl J. Bem, a social psychologist and Professor Emeritus at Cornell University, first published in 2011 in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology.
Okay.
Doesn't sound too sexy so far, does it?
No, I was going to say I'll go blow these candles out.
As is traditional when we cover academic papers on this podcast, we like to assess the title for its true academic potential. Isn't that right, Ben?
Oh, yeah, they're usually quite wordy.
This one is a good one. Feeling the Future, Experimental Evidence for Anomalous Retroactive Influences on Cognition and Affect.
I get it. Okay, so something that you perform now has an effect on something that happened in the past. Is that correct?
Kind of. Pretty close.
Okay.
It's basically looking into what is known as retroactive precognition. I mean, that sounds like a bit of a contradiction in terms, but let's define it. So retroactive precognition, also known as retrocausality, refers to the idea that future events can somehow influence past events.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, yeah, it suggests information about the future can affect something that has already occurred in the past or that is happening in the present, I guess, as well.
That's got to be incredibly difficult to measure, because if it affects something in the past, how would you know? Because it would pre-exist. Do you know what I mean? Getting my head around.
There's going to be a lot of trying to get my head around things, but hopefully I can explain it simply.
Okay.
But the concept challenges those traditional notions of causality, basically the linear flow of time. And it does imply a non-linear relationship between the past, present and future. We've talked about that before on the podcast. Mm. Now, supporters of retroactive precognition propose that information or influences from the future can reach back in time to impact earlier events, potentially leading to change in the past based on the future outcome. It's one of those concepts that does mess with your head, isn't it?
I'm looking at your white wall and making sense of that in my head. Yeah, I think I've got it.
It reminded me while I was reading the paper, and especially doing this bit. Do you remember the first time you saw Terminator, the movie?
Yes.
And then afterwards you had all those weird discussions about, so hold on a second. So they sent back an assassin to the past to kill the mother of the guy who's leading the resistance in the future. The guy who's leading the resistance sends someone's back to stop the Terminator killing the leader of the resistance mother, and then basically becomes the father of the leader of the resistance. You know what I mean? And so if they'd not sent someone back to kill her, he wouldn't have been born in the first place. So it does mess with your head, right?
Yeah, it does. Yes, that's right. Yes.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
right?
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. But It's the grandfather paradox.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I could have just said that, couldn't I? Would have been much
No,
easier.
we'll go through loads of film plots. To fully understand retrocausality, let's look at Garfield and his hatred of Mondays. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the definitions the paper uses for psychic phenomena, which is sometimes called psi, PSI. Now, the author, Daryl Bem, defines telepathy as the apparent transfer of information from one person to another without the mediation of any known channel of sensory communication. So I guess that's basically something that's occurring in the present, right?
Yes. Between two people who can't see each other, hear each other, touch each other.
Yeah. He defines clairvoyance as the apparent perception of objects or events that do not provide a stimulus to the known senses. I guess this definition differs from the last because the person is not trying to physically or deliberately send the information. That's how I read it.
Yes, they're sort of having their mind read.
Yes, good way of putting it. Psychokinesis, so we kind of know what that is. That's the influence of thoughts or intentions on something physical or a biological process.
Yep.
Precognition, so conscious cognitive awareness, or premonition, effective apprehension of a future event that could not otherwise be anticipated through any known process. Basically, the future impacting the past.
Right.
Now, the paper is really focused and interested in retroactive precognition rather than something more akin to clairvoyance or telepathy. I thought of a way of maybe clarifying what that means. I think I can illustrate it using those Zener cards, or at least talking about them. Now, I'm sure that all of you know what Zener cards are. They're like playing cards, but each card has a picture on it, a cross, a star, a wavy line. We've all seen them, right?
From that famous scene in Ghostbusters with Bill Murray
Yeah.
and the student, yes.
So one person has a card and the other has to say what is on the card, obviously without seeing it or knowing what's on it. Now, to do that in the definition of telepathy in this paper, I would look at a card, see it had a star on it, and try and transmit it to you, Ben.
Yeah.
If I was successful, you would say, it's a star, Peter.
Yes.
That's telepathy, right?
Yes.
Clairvoyancy, or ESP, would be, let's say a computer picks a card, or the sender hasn't seen it, so doesn't know or try and communicate it to you, but you still say it's a star. That's clairvoyance, again, in the present rather than linking to the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It would be precognition if the person predicted what was on the card before it was chosen or known to the other person or a computer. That's precognition, right?
Yes. So no conscious being knows what the next thing is going to be. Each of the subjects, they don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess if you take that concept a stage further, you can start to debate whether the person somehow saw into the future to know that the card had a star on it, or alternatively, by picking a star, did they change the card in the future?
Oh, yes, I see what you mean.
So we're back to Terminator again, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. Or, I suppose from what you were saying earlier, they see the star and then send that message back to their past selves.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Now, we do have a lot of remote viewers who listen to this podcast, so I wanted to point out that the paper we are talking about today defines remote viewing in the context of clairvoyance, viewing something that is happening in the present rather than the future. I don't know whether they're taking their steer from some of those original Stanford experiments in the 70s with Ingo Swann and Harold Puzoff. I don't know. But I know remote viewers might be screaming, saying that they can view anywhere in space and time, past, present and future, but this paper has a narrow definition of that.
Okay.
So let's focus on the paper. Now, according to Daryl Bem, precognition and premonition are themselves special cases of the more general phenomena known as psi, PSI. The anomalous retroactive influences of some future event on an individual's current responses, whether those responses are conscious or non-conscious. This article reports 9 experiments designed to test for such retroactive influencing by time reversing several well-established psychological effects, so that the individual's responses are obtained before the general causal stimulus event occurs. So in layman terms, he's saying that precognition, knowing something before it happens, premonition, feeling that something is going to happen, are specific examples of psi. This idea is about how something that will happen in the future can somehow affect how a person thinks, feels, or acts now, even if they're not aware of it.
Right, okay. Oh, so that's how you prove it. So you have to record what's happening now.
Yeah.
And then see whether something that happens next
Influenced.
could be said to influence the thing that they feel now. Right, okay.
So they conducted 9 experiments that try and see if this future influence really existed. To test this, the researchers collected people's reactions or responses before the event they think might cause those reactions actually occurred. Exactly what you just said. Now, the paper goes through some past experiments that have influenced how they chose to conduct their own. For example, the author says, the experiments in this article are concerned with apparent retroactive influences or generalised forms of precognition. Experimental tests of precognition have been reported for more than half a century. Most of the early experiments used forced choice designs in which participants were explicitly challenged to guess which one of several potential targets would be randomly selected at a later time. So he goes on to say typical targets have been ESP card symbols, which we've talked about, coloured light bulbs, the faces of a die, or visual elements on a computer display. So when a participant correctly selects the actual target to be, it's designed as a hit. And the psi performance is typically expressed as a hit rate, the percentage of the hits in an overall trial. Make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So this is basically to just establish whether this is luck and chance as we can define it, or whether there really is some kind of paranormal phenomena happening.
Yeah. Now, Harold Bem goes on to talk about how later experiments where the participants were not tasked or it wasn't clear to them that they were trying to predict an outcome, those experiments suggested the hit rate is often higher if the participant is not aware of what they're doing. You've talked about those kind of experiments before where people predicted before knowing, right? I remember you mentioning them a few times on the podcast.
Yeah. There was one where they measured an emotional response before they showed them like a flower or a gun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And some of these are a bit like that. But in these tests, they wanted to see whether using erotic or pornographic material would increase the hit rate, and the same with disturbing or scary images.
Okay.
They summarised that participants having an emotional arousal or increased heart rate before being shown an erotic or disturbing picture might increase the effects of premonition, if it exists.
Sometimes both those pictures are the same thing.
Yeah, well, I don't know what that does. The idea, Ben, that not knowing you are trying to predict a future outcome and that could make you better at it really fascinated me. It started me thinking about some of the remote viewing tests we've done.
Yes, because you don't know what you're supposed to be looking at.
You don't, but you do know there is a task there.
That's true.
Someone sets a target and we try and draw without any knowledge what the image is or describe details about it. Now, if you remember back, when we did a target Daz Smith set us, we recorded ourselves doing the test, didn't we? You talked about your feelings while you were doing the work, feeling pressure to get it right or the desire to please Daz Smith.
Yeah, that's
true. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And at times I had a different experience. I sometimes became stressed about the possibility I was getting it right. It scared me. Do you remember Daz described that as a fear of psi? I didn't quite understand it at the time, but I do now understand what he means by that term.
Yes, I do recall that, because it's that idea of, am I just about to prove something that I can't believe? Yeah.
So I wondered if by eliminating the pressure that you are trying to identify a target or get a right answer, it may make the process more potent. It eliminates some of the noise, making the target signal stronger, maybe.
Right, yeah, okay. I think I see the logic in that, yeah.
Because you haven't got the pressure.
Yeah, I suppose so.
And I mean, this is not in the paper. This was just my thoughts when I was reading it.
In that respect, you think you're doing a different test, or you don't even know you're doing a test?
you think you're doing a different test in most
Right.
of the ones that they show. And I'll
Yeah.
let's get on to that now.
But you just as you say that, you know how we discussed about that, I find it uncanny that the phenomena that you see on the road where you go, I'm not going to overtake,
Yeah.
or I'm going to be careful on this bend, and then a van comes the other way, or there's a broken down car right on the bend. But somehow you know it. Somehow something said, oh, you got to slow down, or you can't do that maneuver.
Yeah.
And I have experienced that so many times, and I've tested that with friends, and I know they have as well.
Yeah.
And it's either that we just, because everyone that I converse with is usually quite experienced in driving, and the only time that you notice that you've done it is that time when you go, oh, that would have been close. But you do it all the time just because you're an experienced driver. That's the thing that you can't test in that scenario.
Yeah.
So what you're describing actually rules that bit out.
Yeah. It's a bit like gamblers only remembering or mainly remembering their wins, rather than their losses, isn't it? Well, let's look at the experiments. Experiment 1. Precognitive detection of erotic stimuli. Now, most of the early experiments in precognition, Daryl Bem says, explicitly challenge participants to guess which one of several stimuli would be randomly selected after they recorded their guess. In most of these experiments, participants were also given explicit trial-by-trial feedback on their performance. This first experiment adopts this traditional protocol using erotic pictures as explicit reinforcement for correct precognitive guesses. They recruited 100 people, all psychology students. 50 women, 50 men took part in the experiments. This is what the participants were told, Ben. This is an experiment that tests for ESP. It takes about 20 minutes and is run completely by a computer. First, you will answer a couple of brief questions. Then, on each trial of the experiment, pictures of 2 curtains will appear on the screen side by side. One of them has a picture behind it, the other one has a blank wall. Your task is to click on the curtain that you feel has the picture behind it. The curtain will then open, permitting you to see if you selected the correct answer. There will be 36 trials in all. Several of the pictures contain explicit erotic images, e.g. couples engaged in non-violent but explicit consensual sexual acts. If you object to seeing such images, you should not participate in the experiment. Doesn't say if anyone dropped out at that point.
No. I mean, we've all been clubbing in Cyrus says. No. Okay, so...
That's what they were told.
Okay, but what actually happens is...
Basically, this looks like a test for clairvoyance, right? Or that's what the participants believe.
Yeah.
2 curtains, one has a picture behind it. Choose which one has the picture. Some of the images might be erotic. What the participants did not know was neither the picture itself nor its left-right position was determined until after the participant recorded his or her guess, making the procedure a test of detecting a future event.
Right, okay, I see.
i.e. precognition. But they didn't know that. They felt there was an image there and they just had to pick. But in reality, there were the 2 curtains had nothing behind them at that point. So predicting the position of the image, left or right, by chance would give you a hit rate of 50%. And the test found that for non-erotic pictures, the hit rate was about that. However, for erotic pictures, the hit rate was 53.1%. Now remember, the position of the image, left or right, and the type of image, erotic or not, was only determined by random after the test subject had made their choice.
Mm-hmm. So there's a difference of about 4%.
Yeah, which may not sound a lot, but it is statistically significant.
Yeah, okay.
It suggested that participants somehow sensed which side the image was going to be displayed and that they were statistically significantly better at it if the image was going to be erotic.
And that's the same for both sexes?
Yes.
Okay. And it's a pool of 100 participants, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess the only criticism in the design there is simply that that's only 100 people getting 54 instead of 50 right. But, I'm no statistician. If that is statistically significant, then that is that is surprising to me.
There are some other interesting findings from this and other studies in Psy. extroverts display a greater propensity than introverts in psychic abilities. To quote from the paper, over the years, the trait of extroversion has been frequently reported as a correlation of psi, with extroverts achieving higher psi scores than introverts. A meta-analysis of 60 independent experiments published between 1945 and 1983 involving several kinds of psi tasks revealed a small but reliable correlation between extroversion and psi performance. So they went back and studied a whole 60 different tests and they all gave you that result. The correlation was observed again in later sets of telepathy studies. The component of extroversion that underlies this correlation appears to be the extrovert's susceptibility to boredom and a tendency to seek out stimulation. Eysenck, who wrote about this in 1966, attributes the positive correlation between extroversion and psi to the fact that extroverts are more susceptible to monotony and respond more favourably to novel stimuli. Basically, Ben, if you're an extrovert with a penchant for porn, you've hit the psychic jackpot, haven't you? Let me just give you the figures.
Yeah.
When you just look at people who took that test I just talked about, using erotic material, and they were deemed extroverts, they scored a hit rate of 57.6%.
Okay, that makes more sense to my non-maths brain.
Yeah.
So the only thing that I'm curious about now on this is the experiment design using an erotic image as reward. Like if you remember that scene in Ghostbusters, he sort of uses the electric shock.
Yeah.
It's a comedy scene. But why not reward somebody, behind a picture, behind one of the curtains is a dog or not a dog, and you get a chocolate if you get the dog.
Yeah.
Would that not have worked?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean,
And it might be that they chose that because it's, I suppose, even more than chocolate, it appeals to a more primordial part of your brain, the lizard's brain.
yes, he does go on to that, and I will talk about that a bit later. Let's have a look at experiment 2, which is called precognitive avoidance of negative stimuli. So 107 people took part in this one, and this is what they were told. This is an experiment that tests for ESP. The experiment is run entirely by computer, takes about 15 minutes. On each trial of the experiment, you'll be shown a picture and its mirror image side by side, and you're asked to indicate which image you like better. The computer will then flash a masked picture on the screen. The way in which this procedure tests for ESP will be explained to you at the end of the session. So that's what they were told. Let's have a look at what was really going on. So the experiment was a little more complicated than that. Participants were shown two neutral, so not particularly stimulating images side by side, mirrored image, let's say a bus and its mirror image. The participants had to choose which one they preferred. A random number generator would then pick one of the bus images to be the target. If the participant had chosen the target correctly, in advance remember, they were subliminally shown a positive image 3 times. If the participant picked the wrong target, they were shown what is described as a highly arousing negative image. So one of these negative images they mentioned was a kind of vicious-looking Rottweiler, snarling and dribbling, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I guess the purpose of this was to see if by showing the participants a negative image in the future after they made a wrong choice, this would influence their decision in the past.
Yeah, okay.
Well, on this one, the extroverts were twice as successful than the whole sample.
Now, evolutionarily, that makes sense. That makes even more sense.
Yeah, non-extroverts achieved the result you would expect to find with chance.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I suppose there is an agreed scale of what makes an extrovert.
There is, yeah. I just haven't got into that detail, but there is a whole section of the paper that goes into how they deem someone an extrovert.
Oh, okay, that's good. Okay,
I think it's a well-known psychological test.
Yeah, but that means then that if that is an evolutionarily beneficial trait, which it would seem to be, because that is saying rather than just reproduction, which is the first experiment. This is about staying alive, staying safe.
Avoiding danger.
Avoiding danger.
Yeah.
then that makes sense. So what's the advantage of being an introvert and not being able to do it? That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, that is a good question.
Maybe that is an accident of the way that we have evolved as a culture.
Well, maybe the one thing that just jumped into my mind, I've got no idea whether this is right or not. If you go way back and you've got foragers and you've got hunters, let's say, having that ability of being an extrovert would not be as essential maybe as a forager, or you know what I mean, or you know what I mean, or a farmer. If you take it a little bit later, you don't have to have that constant fear of danger, do you?
So it helps to balance out the roles
or
in an emerging society.
Or in those roles, maybe over time, like, you know, it isn't passed on because you don't use it.
Yeah, I would not have thought this would go with personality trait.
Yeah.
Okay, so the extroverts are much better at predicting danger.
Yeah, and erotic stimuli.
Okay, but danger, they were twice as good. So they were like...
They were much better at danger.
What did you say, 57, 58%, something like that?
That was the one before.
Oh, that was the one before. Oh, so it's even better than that.
Yeah.
Wow, so that is really statistically relevant. Okay.
The next experiments were called Retroactive Priming 1 and 2. I love these titles. So for these examples, participants were asked to judge whether an image is pleasant or unpleasant, and the speed that they make this choice is measured. Just before the picture appears, a positive or negative word appears before the picture, so either beautiful or ugly.
Right.
So generally in these types of tests, the participants respond more accurately and quicker when the word that precedes the image is accurate. So if the picture's, I don't know, a glorious sunset, and that's about to be shown, if the word beautiful is shown beforehand, this is what they call a congruent or correct answer. If the word ugly is shown before the beautiful image, it's an incongruent wrong answer. Basically, if you're given a positive word before seeing a positive picture, your response time will be quicker than if you're given a negative word with a positive image. So this is a well-known general fact, right?
Okay.
Let's get on to the actual test. Again, 100 Cornell undergraduates, 15 to 20-minute experiment. They were shown a picture on each of the 64 trials and were asked to press one of two keys on the keyboard as quickly as they could to indicate whether the picture was pleasant or unpleasant. The participants' response time in making this judgment was the dependent variable, and the difference in mean response time between incongruent and congruent trials is the index of the priming effect, with positive differences denoting faster responses on congruent trials. Basically, the correct word before the picture should help them make a quicker decision, right? Mm. Ben, you're probably wondering how this fits into psychic abilities. Well, they structured the test in two ways. In the first 32 trials, the participants were flashed the word after seeing the image. So beautiful or ugly after seeing the amazing sunset picture. Now, the second set of trials worked in the more traditional way, with the word being flashed up before seeing the picture, right?
Right.
They ran two types of trials, one pairing the words and pictures with a random number generator, the second set of trials making sure the word and pictures were congruent or accurate. So sunset always had the word beautiful associated with it in the second set, right?
Okay.
Let's get on to the results. I guess more traditional version, where the words were shown, then the image, produced the results they would have expected. So in line with other tests that have been done in that way. Again, the right word before the right image, people responded quicker. The weird thing is, Ben, in the tests where they did not show them the word until after the picture, the results were roughly the same, which suggests that the participants psychically knew the word in the future before seeing it.
Yeah, logically that does make sense, doesn't it?
Because it's a well-established test, that one, the traditional way of doing it. The next test is called Retroactive Habituation and Induction of Boredom, which I really hope is not a comment on how I'm presenting these experiments.
Sounds much like watching BBC Four.
Yeah.
So is this something to do with trying to test the extroverts in the group?
Yeah, you're right. This one is about exposure. If I show you an image that generates a strong emotional response in you, and then I keep showing you a similar or the same image repeatedly, your emotional arousal will diminish over time. Basically, exposure to the image over time reduces your emotional reaction to it. While I was working on this, it made me think about people who work in very traumatic environments, like medical people working in A&E. Over time, the shock value of what they're seeing and dealing with diminishes the more you work there, so the more you are exposed to it. It's that kind of theory. So in historical, non-psychic related, I guess more general experiments on this effect, if the stimulus is initially very unpleasant, e.g. frightening or disgusting, the author says, the stimulus becomes more neutral or less negatively arousing. If the stimulus is initially very pleasant, it becomes more neutral or less positively arousing the more you're exposed to it. Now, this was demonstrating an experiment in which participants who had been subliminally exposed to extremely negative and extremely positive words subsequently rated those words as less extreme than the matched control groups. So negative words were rated less negatively and positive words were rated less positively than the control group because people had seen them more times. This is a traditional way this experiment works, right?
Right, okay.
Across a wide range of contexts, the more frequently humans or animals are exposed to a particular stimulus, the more they come to like it. The effect has been known for over a century. So in this study, they try to explore this and tie it in with psychic abilities. So once again, I'm going to let you know what the participants were told. In this experiment, we were interested in measuring emotional reaction to a wide variety of visual images in a procedure that tests for ESP. The experiment is run by computer, 20-25 minutes in total. Each trial of the experiment involves a pair of pictures. First, you will be shown the two pictures side by side and asked to indicate which one you like better. You will then be asked to watch passively as those pictures are flashed repeatedly on the screen. The way in which this procedure tests for ESP will be explained at the end of the session. They say most of the pictures range from very pleasant to mildly unpleasant, but in order to investigate a wide range of emotional content, some of the pictures contain very unpleasant images, e.g. snakes or bodily injuries, they say. So normally this experiment works like this, Ben. The participant is repeatedly exposed subliminally to a picture. This picture is called the target. The participant is then shown two pictures side by side and asked to indicate which one he or she likes better. One of the pictures is the target, the other is a closely matched picture that the participant has not seen before, basically. If the participant prefers the target, the trial is scored a hit.
How do you mean a closely matched picture?
If I was showing you an image of bodily injury,
Yeah.
I subliminally flash that image at you a few times. Then I show you two images side by side. One, that image, another one, a different kind of bodily injury that is still unpleasant.
Oh, okay. So a gashed knee and a gashed arm.
Yes. And if I've subliminally flashed the knee to you, you should probably go for the arm because you've been more exposed to the knee picture.
Right. So as opposed to a gashed knee and a snake, they wouldn't do that. I see. Okay.
In the actual experiment, they reverse steps 1 and 2. The participant picks a picture from the two choices, and then the participant is shown the repeated subliminal image afterwards. Now, similar to the experiment before, there was a mixture of neutral and strong negative images. And the results were strange. The first set of tests involved strong negative image, and the hit rate was statistically better than chance at 53.1%. But women scored slightly better than men. They did another test using erotic images instead of negative ones. This is so funny. But they realised from other erotic tests that the images they used for men and women had to be different in intensity, arousal, and it depended on their sexual preference.
Well, yeah, I mean, that I sort of took it as read that they would do that. But yes, I mean, see, this is always the problem with these. I mean, not a problem. I know that it can be taken out of the could avoid being a variable. But when I was thinking about it, like I'm not particularly, I wouldn't find a snake necessarily particularly negative image.
Yeah.
I mean, a spider, yes, but a snake, no. And you're right, one man's erotic image is another man's Noel Edmonds in Wellingtons. And
How did you know what my erotic image was?
it's because of all the posters of Noel Edmonds in Wellingtons in the other room.
Fair enough.
But that sort of that fuzziness of the human particular desire is, I think, that does make it challenging. But it doesn't remove, like, you wouldn't get those results if it wasn't having some effect. It's just like whether dialing up and down those erotic images, or how nasty those negative images are, whether that would have an even more extreme result on people.
Yeah. But I guess the key point is they're not being subliminally conditioned to that image until after they've picked it.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Again, there was a statistically higher hit rate for future prediction of erotic images. So on both of these tests, what we'll call negative images and erotic images, they did produce this statistically 53-ish% uplift, or not uplift, but difference. One of the other experiments was really interesting. They tried to create an experiment that would retroactively induce boredom, which I thought was a good challenge, making the participants feel boredom in the future that would affect their decision in the past.
How do you design an experiment for that?
Pretty much works like the other one in terms of you're shown a bored image, an image that's boring, let's say, or not stimulating afterwards.
So they don't sort of expose you to a chat with grandma in an old people's home for half an hour and then come back and make you do the experiment?
No, it's still image-based. But the results showed that extroverts could be made bored retroactively. Boredom in the future affected their choices in the present.
Negatively?
Yes.
Right, okay. So if you're...
Compared to introverts, which basically hit chance.
So if you're bored, not only do you make worse decisions generally, you make worse decisions with PSI. I'm not quite sure what the right terminology with this is. You don't have as greater ability to see shortly into the future if you're bored in the future.
Yeah, well, I guess the implication...
I'm not a copywriter.
I guess the implication is, if you go with it, extroverts are constantly looking for stimulation.
Right, yeah, okay.
So if they're not getting it... Well, I guess if we go with my analogy of, the who's going to be a hunter, who's going to be a farmer, this would be why extroverts are not very good at being farmers, because they need the excitement of hunting, where the introvert would be quite happy not having all that extra stimulus.
Yeah, I see.
But the key point in all these experiments is, I think, apart from one, which just gave which I haven't got into, just gave a result that you would have got through with chance. Out of the 9, 8 showed a statistically significant uplift for future influencing on the past, but it was even more extreme if you were an extrovert rather than an introvert.
Right, okay. So what does this practically mean? It means that we have the ability... I mean, this is the other thing that's sort of loose about it, is how far into this do we go? Because we're just testing immediate kind of emotional responses.
Yeah.
So if you were going to see a beautifully attractive woman in an hour's time, your body is not going to be like, well, I'll wait till I'm a bit closer to the time. And similarly with a negative image. So what we're saying is that this experiment shows that we can adapt our body, whether it be sweating or whatever, a response to something that happens a very short time in the future.
Yeah, or our actions, our body or our actions.
Or actions, right, yeah, okay.
I mean, the author's conclusion, he says, if psi exists, then it is not unreasonable to suppose that it might have been acquired through evolution by conferring survival and reproductive advantage on the species. For example, the ability to anticipate and therefore to avoid danger confers an obvious evolutionary advantage that would be greatly enhanced by the ability to anticipate danger precognitively. So that's kind of like you driving around the corner and knowing something's coming at you. Similarly, the possible of an evolved precognitive ability to anticipate sexual opportunities would have a similar effect.
Yeah, okay. So I guess they make no attempt to understand the mechanism of PSI.
They don't directly, but he does link it with quantum mechanics.
Aha. He must have been thinking about us. Right, so this is because at that level, can we see some activities, can we see some behaviour at that level which mirrors what we're seeing here on the macro level?
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't go into that much detail, but I'll tell you what he says. He said, those who follow contemporary developments in modern physics will be aware that several features of quantum phenomena are themselves incompatible with our everyday conception of physical reality. Most psi researchers see sufficiently compelling parallels between these phenomena and the characteristics of psi to warrant considering them as a potential candidate for theories of psi. We must allow for the possibility that particles that have once interacted can become entangled, so that even when they are later separated by arbitrary large distances, on observation made on one of the particles will simultaneously affect what will be observed on its entangled partner in ways that are incompatible with physically permissible causal mechanics, such as a signal transmitted between them. I guess how this ties into precognition, we've talked about it before with entanglement and the effect of time. If two particles react instantaneously over a great distance, it suggests that time does not at all work in the way we think it works. There was that Chinese experiment where they managed to move two entangled particles, one on Earth and one in space.
Yes.
And the implication is that basically that effect would have happened faster than the speed of light.
Yes, it was instantaneous. Yes.
It was instantaneous, so they would have been happening at different times, even though it's instant, in the way we look at time at the moment.
Yeah, I think I get you. Although every time I think I get it, I sort of don't. So what he's saying is that you shouldn't look at time. The way that this PSI might be working is don't look at time as you know it now.
As a linear progression.
Yeah, think about two states being connected and their influencing of each other. Yeah, okay. No, I ran out of words that explain it. But I think I know what you're saying.
But I think the point you're making is a really interesting one, because effectively what they're testing here is a very short-term effect, isn't it? It's something that's happening in the future, but in a relatively short future. If you were going to do this experiment to test that theory, you would do it over varying periods of time. So I would show you an erotic... No, I wouldn't show you it. I would give you the choice of picking two pictures behind a screen, one of which was erotic, and then I would do that subliminal stimuli thing a year later and see if that affected it. Do you know what I mean? That would show whether this is a short-term phenomenon, as you were saying. If it's evolutionary, there's no point anticipating danger in a year's time. If you're out hunting, you need to be able to do it in the next few minutes, don't you?
Yeah, I'm reminded of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I think the lifts have the ability to see 3 seconds into the future so that they can arrive at the floor that you want them to.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah,
and
we know in a simple effect, time moves differently if I was at the bottom of a tall building and you were at the top of it.
Yes, it does. Yeah, but yes, I mean that's speed of rotation of the Earth and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, but if I could instantaneously interact with the particle at the top, there would be a time differentiation between the two of us.
Oh, I see what you're getting at.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it would mean that, in that sense, time doesn't work in the same way.
Right.
As we think
Yes,
it does.
I see what you're saying. Yes, it depends upon where the observer is. And in this case, we are not... so we're not observing our own mind. So to another... And again, I've sort of run out of road.
Well,
but
it's interesting because the next point he makes is about observer theory. So observer theory, we've covered it a lot on the podcast before. This idea of the dual slit experiment, Schrodinger's cat. The basic principle is on certain things, if a human is observing an experiment, it gives a different result than it would if it wasn't being observed by a human, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Bit Schrodinger's cat. The cat is both alive and dead until we open the box and see whether it's alive or dead. So that the superposition, by looking at it, we've completed the outcome. But beforehand, it was both alive and dead.
That also goes to... So that's very interesting when you talk about the superposition, because recently I've been reading a paper about the testing of the Willow quantum chip by a bunch of scientists who want to work out whether that might help us understand consciousness. And they have this theory that there is a superposition taking place within our own brains, and the way that we make decisions is caused by the wave sort of breaking on that superposition, and then that constant activity causes consciousness. And so I wonder whether what we're seeing here when he talks about that quantum effect, what we're doing is actually looking inside the mechanics of the brain's behavior using quantum physics to explain how we become conscious, and therefore this is a byproduct of that consciousness.
Well, this is exactly pretty much what he says. He says these features of quantum mechanics have led to observational theories of psi, in which it is not just the act of observation, but the consciousness of the human observer that plays an active role in what will be observed. So I think he's basically, you know what, that thing I alluded to earlier about the Zener cards, if you pick a star before a star has been picked and the card comes up as a star, could that be you've changed the outcome in the past? So you've made it a star by picking it. That's that's where the consciousness comes in, right? Yeah.
I see. Yeah.
Well, I think his final conclusion, I mean, it's not really a conclusion, but I liked it. And maybe it shows the kind of how difficult it is to get your head around some of these concepts. He brings in Alice in Wonderland in his final conclusion. He writes, near the end of her encounter with the White Queen, Alice protests that one can't believe impossible things. He says that's a sentiment in which 34% of academic psychologists who consider psi to be impossible would surely agree. The White Queen famously retorted, I dare say you haven't had much practice. When I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. He says, unlike the White Queen, I do not advocate believing impossible things, but perhaps this article will prompt the other 66% of academic psychologists to raise their posterior possibilities of believing at least one anomalous thing before breakfast.
And to bring it round, that quote is requoted by Douglas Adams in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the restaurant at the end of the universe, when he says, if you've done 6 impossible things before breakfast, why not have breakfast at Milliways, the restaurant at the end of the universe?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really a conclusion. It's more an appeal, I guess.
It's an appeal, yeah. Yeah, because it is. But I do think this way of trying to understand the brain's function is becoming a little bit more mainstream, because like it is only recently that we've been able to actually do physical experiments with quantum,
Yeah.
quantum universes using these chips and like applying what happens in the brain to those. So I think there's going to be many more interesting things that come out of it. But I do think that is fascinating. That idea of time, precognition, evolution. I mean, that might then tell us what is happening with seers and people that can read fortunes, as it were, which I think is it's an old-fashioned way of putting it, but they might just be experiencing a different way. They've exercised that part of their brain so that it's able to perform that function. Yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, I want to just give the sceptical point of view. There have been criticisms of the paper. I would say they're the kind of criticisms we always get with these kind of papers, and maybe arguably wider academic papers. Some have questioned the statistical analysis and the selection criteria for participants. Others have suggested subconscious bias in the interpretation of the findings. This is probably the most damning in some ways. Subsequent tests using the same or similar methodology have not given similar results. So I'm not saying the critics are right, but I thought it's important we highlight that.
That's disappointing.
View. I mean, I did find the paper really fascinating. This connection with arousing stimulus, whether extreme, negative or erotic, showing some kind of connection with psychic phenomenon, I thought was fascinating. And this idea that if you're an extrovert, more likely to seek stimulation, you're more likely to display these types of abilities, that really interests me. Although, Ben, I did wonder if this whole paper and all these experiments are the result of the author's partner questioning his internet search history. You see him as a panic saying, no, I'm putting together a number of experiments on psychic ability, precognition and erotic images. He had to go through with the whole thing after he'd done it.
Different people have different tastes. Yeah. That's why I'm doing it. I'm... It's annoying that it hasn't been able to be repeated, but I wonder how many times it has tried to be repeated.
Yeah, that's the other thing. But I like the idea of the test. I was wondering if there was some way we could... I don't know if it's this, but it's been a while since we've done an episode where we've tested ourselves. Remember when we did the Zena cards? We were absolutely terrible.
Is this just a way of you buying one of those magazines?
Yeah. It's fine. I've got plenty of Noel Edmonds photos.
As I can see. Yeah. I mean, the way to do it would actually be to take a couple of people that we know that haven't heard...
Of the experiments, yeah.
Yeah, and... Or you haven't heard this podcast.
Yeah.
And... just take them aside and try, because it's not particularly difficult to set up.
Yeah, and if we think that would be a bit weird using the erotic ones, we could do the negative. Oh, is that worse? I don't know. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, I'm sure we could do that. I mean, I think the negative ones are much more tricky to choose because, like I said, I'm not particularly upset by snakes. My friend who's a nurse wouldn't be upset by a gashed knee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but remember, the test is not whether you would be upset, whether you're more upset with the image that you've had, or post seeing that image that you've been delivered in the future multiple times, so you're desensitized in the future to that image, if that makes sense. I don't think I explained that well. But.
Yeah. I think there's probably something in the design of a film where the dog dies and a film where the dog doesn't die.
Yeah.
You show me the cover to Marley and Me, and I'm running in the other direction. I wish I'd never watched that blooming film. Yeah. Okay. No. Let's see if we can get an opportunity to try that, because, I mean, we won't be able to have a statistically reliable sample, but it is interesting, and it does at least open the possibility of thinking about these things, which is always, I guess, the thing that we all sort of rail against, which is, nobody ever tests this stuff in a laboratory environment, and that's because it's really hard to test in a laboratory environment. And then when they do, people go, oh, I don't really believe it. I mean, we've been there and metaphorically got the T-shirt talking about the Uri Geller experiments with the CIA and the locked room and everything. And then there's always 100 people that say, "Oh yeah, but it wasn't real. It wasn't a real experiment, and this happened and that happened." And you never, you'll never really get to the truth of it unless enough people do it. So
the other thing that I thought was quite powerful was him going back and looking at studies from 1945 to 1980, 60 studies, including his own, which indicated that psychic phenomenon was more prevalent in people who are extroverts. So it wasn't just his test. Now, I guess critics would say, was he selective in which tests he chose? But still, it's 60 different types of tests over, 40-odd years. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Well, while I was putting this together, I posted something on our Patreon site, which was there was a little weird coincidence. We're not going to go into it now because it would take too much time to explain. But if you do join us on our Patreon exclusive show, Ben and Peter's Extra Scoop, we'll talk about it there. It was weird. So if you want to join us as a Patreon, go to patreon.com/TQM pod, early access to episodes, the Ben and Peter's Extra Scoop exclusive app, and you get access to our Discord server now as well.
And you can find out how to do that segue for yourself on page 102 of the Quantum Mechanics book of segues.
Yeah.
That was excellent. That was one of the best.
Thank you.
Right, we'll see you over on the Extra Scoop. Otherwise, see you next week. I'm going to be asking you to all get lost next week.
Yeah. Rude.
Yeah, it is a bit rude. I'm also trying to avoid eating all the Easter eggs. They're in the shops now, and I will admit to having had a cream egg on the way over, which is very naughty.
Yeah, good old cream egg, though.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right, I'll see you later.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Are you the quantum mechanics?